Hello everyone, thanks for coming. Yeah, it's really nice to be invited to speak on this series of webinars. My name is Chris, I work for Pathras. Today I'll be talking about leisure in a hostile environment and how we resist border violence through informal leisure spaces. It's really nice to speak at stuff like this because often leisure is seen as frivolous or not taken as seriously as other aspects of, everyday life and activism. And really my job, or what I see my job to be doing, is banging the drum that leisure is an important part of life and is something that we should be organised around and advocate and be activists. So just a bit of background about me. I'm an activist interested in football and migration. I organised the Football for All initiative in Leeds that's been running from 2013 to present. And I'll give you the background story to that as we go along. In 2018, I think, 2017-18, I accidentally got into doing a PhD at Leeds Beckett University in the School of Sport, and my PhD explored the significance of participating in informal football spaces in the everyday lives of forced migrant men in Leeds. So my PhD basically explored the Football for All project with the men that attended it in the context of their everyday lives. And now since I've finished, I work for Pathras in Leeds as the volunteer coordinator and the drop-in coordinator. And due to the nature of it being a small community-based charity, end up getting involved in all sorts of different things. Again, some of them I'll address a little bit later. So what we will look at today, do a quick recap on the hostile environment immigration policy. I really want to keep going over all grounds, and I know most of you will have a pretty good idea about the stuff that I'll briefly address already, but it's really important to kind of get some kind of groundwork in place to situate the significance of leisure within that context and not separate them both. After that, talk about the personal effects of the hostile environment and the hostile environment within with relation to leisure and sport spaces. I'll then talk about informal spaces of sport and leisure as resistance in everyday life. And then finally, we'll look at what you can do. As I go along, I'm not sure how much time there'll be left for questions at the end, but just stick questions in the chat. My final slide as well will have my email address on it. So if there's anything you want to chat to me outside of this webinar, then I'm more than happy to. Like I said, this is basically a passion project for me, and I'm more than happy to have conversations with people about ideas you might have or answer any questions that you might have as well. Okay, so the hostile environment. As most of you are probably aware, the hostile environment was basically outlined by Theresa May in 2012. It didn't start there, obviously, like the foundations were laid earlier, but in terms of really kind of cementing it and putting it at the forefront of immigration policy, Theresa May was the kind of figurehead of that when she said the aim is to create here in Britain a really hostile environment for illegal immigrants. And as Liberty outlined, the hostile environment is really a sprawling web of immigration controls embedded in the heart of our public services and communities. And that final word's really important for what I'm going to be talking about today. So the border guards no longer sits exclusively on geographical borders. The border guard is situated within the everyday. So banks, schools, healthcare, etc. Now, the controls imposed by the Home Office are really about making everyday life as hard as possible for forced migrants to navigate. So yeah, whether that is, housing, accessing basic public services, etc. There was an attempt to rebrand the hostile environment as the compliant environment post Windrush scandal, when the kind of public discourse and acceptance around the hostile environment changed. There was much more media criticism because the post kind of Windrush scandal was seen as taking the hostile environment too far, like, or it's okay for some but not for others, when really we should be fighting against the hostile environment completely. So there was this attempt by, I think it was Sajid Javid at the time, to kind of rename it as the compliant environment. I think that stuck around for a couple of weeks, but yeah, it's exactly the same thing. And yeah, post Windrush, like obviously the hostile environment is still alive and well, and everything that we see the government coming out with at the minute is about building on the foundations of the hostile environment and intensifying it. So the hostile environment and everyday borders. So yeah, when we think about borders, we usually think of these big fortified walls around the edges of countries, which, yeah, absolutely still the case. Like, we have this image in our head that maybe those, as the hostile environments increase, that those borders at the edges of countries have potentially gone down. But what the hostile environment is about is actually increasing those, but at the same time, like heightening borders in everyday life. So quite often people will see like the EU and the Schengen agreement, Schengen area, as an example of borders kind of decreasing over time in history, and that we kind of in the early 2000s that we're entering a borderless Northern Hemisphere where we advocated for free trade and free movement. In practice, what was really happening was that the border was basically shifting away from internalized in Europe to the edges of Europe. So as some borders got decreased, others got fortified. And I would say that the hostile environment is really about fortifying those borders within our everyday communities. And when I've been teaching this to students, I often say it can be more helpful to visualize borders as a series of gates that swing open and shut in response to the person who's trying to pass through it. So rather than seeing it as big rings that are around things, like, borders are really about, they really kind of adapt in response to the person that is trying to pass through that border. So for me, as a white person with, you know, social and economic capital, my experience of borders is vastly different to if one of the clients of Pathras was trying to navigate everyday life. Crucially, the hostile environment deliberately enforces destitution through no recourse to public funds. So yeah, I won't dwell on this too much longer, and I'm sure you've probably seen either this chart or versions of this chart before, but this just explains how the hostile environment is woven into the tapestry of everyday life through each of these things. So employment, police, housing, healthcare, schools, banking, etc. What often gets forgotten about is leisure and sports spaces within that, and that's something that I want to talk about today, whether that's accessing leisure and sports spaces, or whether it's, you know, how can those spaces be potential resistance to the hostile environment. So leisure and sport. So again, in terms of visualizing the hostile environment, I see it as this kind of, you know, this mythical beast that kind of sinks its tentacles into the formality of public and private institutions. It's always growing, it's always adapting, it's always stretching further and further. And there's, you know, some key tenets, like I talked about before on this slide, that are at the heart of the hostile environment. But the ripple effects of these go much further than kind of, it doesn't isolate just to these things. And, you know, if you don't have access to a bank, what does that mean in terms of your access to leisure and sport. So yeah, really, the tentacles of the hostile environment has got a firm grip on some of these things, whether it's higher education, banks, even food banks. So in my role at Pathras, you know, one of the main things that we do at our drop-in is provide food parcels for people. And the reason why it's really important that we do that is because it's exceptionally hard for people seeking asylum to access mainstream food banks like the Trussell Trust, because you need a reference. It's not as simple as putting your hand up and say, I need a food parcel and picking it up. So as you can see, all these things firmly in the grasp of the hostile environment, but it's about figuring out where leisure and sport sits within that. Like, how much of a grasp does the hostile environment have within leisure and sport? And is there space to resist it within that as well? So in terms of formalised sport and leisure spaces, one of the things that, you know, in this role at Pathras that I've had speaking with a lot of like young people, not just young people, but any clients really, when people are seeking asylum, they're not allowed to work. They have limited access to college and other services. And frankly, their days are often described as just dominated by boredom. So really kind of struggling to get through the days. The days are slow, long, and often people will just pass time by sleeping. And when we've spoken to people and when I've interacted with people, the question that I get asked the most is, how do I get access to a gym? Now, because the majority of people that we work with have Aspirin cards or no bank account, to access a gym is extremely difficult, because you need to set up a standing order, and yeah, gyms are quite exclusive spaces, and to be honest, most of them are really expensive as well. So the possibility of accessing a gym's extremely difficult, and I've spent quite a lot of time trying to advocate for people and trying to contact people to get people into gyms, but in reality, it's extremely difficult. So as you can see in this example, the formalized nature of the gym, you know, paying as transactions, setting up a standing order, being a member of a gym is extremely difficult if you don't have a bank account, and if you've only got an Aspirin card. You won't be able to set up a standing order with an Aspirin card. And on top of that, even if you could, asylum support isn't exactly going to stretch to a gym membership as well. And it's not just within kind of everyday life and within spaces like gyms that people struggle, that we can see the hostile environment in action. In some cases, it's more visible and a lot sharper and brought into focus in a more distinct way. So this is an example of a player in Germany who plays for Hamburg. It's called Bakary Jatta. He's a young player, and when he broke into the first team at Hamburg, a few other teams in the league, kind of joined forces with Bild, which is like the equivalent of the Sun newspaper in Germany, and questioned his age, because he's a young migrant, questioned his age, questioned his identity, questioned that he said he arrived on false documents and all this sort of thing, and tried to get Bakary Jatta banned from playing football in Germany, because they said that, you know, when he arrived 5 years ago, that he arrived on false documents. What was really nice in Germany was that despite a number of clubs trying to push FIFA to get him banned, a lot of other clubs in the league who were rivals kind of came together and said, you know, regardless of his immigration status or anything like that, he shouldn't be subjected to this racist kind of questioning and undermining his position within the team. but yeah, like it was only recently that when you play 11-a-side football, even in a park in Leeds on a Sunday afternoon, no matter if you're not a British citizen, you have to apply for international clearance before you can play for a Sunday league football team. So that means that, like, you know, even if someone comes from Spain or somewhere like that, they'll have to get our local FA to contact the Spanish FA and clear them to allow them to play Sunday league football in England. It's absolutely like levels of bureaucracy that clearly don't need to exist. And recently, FIFA have changed it so that people who are refugees or asylum seekers don't have to do that directly. They don't have to get the FA to contact their country of origin FA and get clearance for them. But this only changed a few years back. But FIFA still ask those players to contact FIFA and get clearance from FIFA. So even just everyday kind of Sunday league football is extremely bureaucratic, and you know, borders are present and visible within that formalized football structure. So the consequence of the hostile environment beyond just that kind of admin, you know, talked about it before, lack of money, which means lack of equipment, lack of access to college or education, which means that language is often a barrier, transport, confidence, just knowing people. If you're kind of forced to stay in your house and kind of sleep through the day, knowing people and getting to know people is extremely difficult. Safety as well. I've spoken to countless people over the years that have played kind of Sunday league football and have left very quickly because of racist abuse that they've had from the other team. So a lot of things kind of come into it that aren't necessarily the hostile environment itself, but more the consequences and the ripple effect of the hostile environment that I talked about before. So let's move on to carving out informal leisure and sports spaces kind of between and beyond the hostile environment. And I love this this image from Grace Lee Boggs. Another world is necessary, another world is possible, another world is happening. And I really think that these kind of political messages shouldn't be isolated to political activism or what we typically see as political activism. We can say another sport or another leisure is necessary, another sport or leisure is possible, and I'll show you how another sport or leisure is happening beyond the formalized leisure and sports spaces that are all too susceptible to the tentacles of the hostile environment. And for me, this came through Yorkshire St Pauli. And this is going to be a quick whistle-stop tour of quite a strange but beautiful story. And again, if this is something people want to chat through with me, my email address will be at the end. But for the purposes of this presentation, just take it as I tell you it at the minute. So Yorkshire St Pauli are a fan club for the Hamburg-based football club St Pauli. The fan club was founded in 2011 in a Wetherspoons pub in Leeds train station, where all the best things in the world happen. Members of the fan club originally came together to watch games and organise collective trips to the Millen Tor. The Millen Tor is the stadium where St Pauli play. One of the key tenets of what we did was organise fundraisers for Pathras. So we would just pass a glass round at half time during watching the screenings, and everyone would just chuck in a couple of quid or the change from the pint and would donate it to Pathras. Then in 2013, we moved from just being a bunch of losers that sit around watching German football, drinking, to starting Football for All, which I'll talk a little bit about in a few slides' time. So what attracted me to FC St. Pauli? Well, FC St. Pauli are a professional football team in the second division, but their fan base is distinctly political. So as you can see, these are images from the stadium. And yeah, like the fan base often organises around refugee rights, a lot of political activism around migration and stuff like that. On one of the stands that's not pictured here, across the entire stands, there's a sign that just says, "High Manchester illegal, no person is illegal." There is one in the middle, but there's a massive one across one of the stands where the fans sit. Is this tokenistic? I think that's a debate that happens quite a lot. But what I would say is the first time that I went to Hamburg in 2013, I went and wasn't really expecting much, but was told that after the game there would be a demonstration outside the stadium, followed by a march through Hamburg in response to young people being detained and deported in Hamburg at the time. And I was like, okay, my experience of like activism in the UK is there's probably going to be about 20 people stood outside the stadium. Everyone's going to have a little shout and a banner, and then we'll go home and that'll be it. After the game, we came out and there was already a few thousand people outside the stadium. We stood there for an hour, and then a few thousand grew into 10,000. This is a Friday night. And then we did a 10-mile march through the entire city. So the whole fan base came out, 10,000 on a Friday night, and marched through the entire city. And while, you know, I think some things within that kind of scene are tokenistic and are problematic, like at the end of the day, like I was like, at that point, I was like, okay, this is serious. This is what activism and football looks like. And because of that, St. Pauli have lots of fan clubs around the world. And yeah, you can work those ones out for yourself, but pretty much every continent has fan clubs on it. And yeah, some absolutely massive, like Glasgow, St. Pauli, and the Athens one as well. And people travel all over the world and form communities around St. Pauli. So yeah, this was us when we were watching the games. We just pass around the glass, and yeah, and it was nice. But as you can, if you look at the photos, like you can see that it's pretty much, you know, predominantly white people who look like me in those photographs. And what we really wanted to do was think about how we actually put the St. Pauli politics into practice. What does that actually look like? Because we were at this point, we started inviting clients down from Paphras to come watch the games with us, which was nice. It worked. Like people were interested and wanted to get involved. But you know, they were coming down and watching second division German football, and like they'd be like, "This is great, but can't we watch like Barcelona or Real Madrid instead?" Which is completely understandable. And after a few kind of months of doing this, there was a growing appetite to start playing football through conversations that we were having with people that were coming down from Paphras. So yeah, we moved from just watching football to playing football, and that's how Football for All was born. So it started as YSP members that wanted to play football in a space where everyone is welcome, regardless of their ability, background, gender, sexuality. And like I said, there was a particular focus on forced migrants in Leeds. Originally, we joined a five-a-side league and invited like service users from Paphras down to join us. And it worked for a little bit, but it was pretty horrible. I don't know if anyone's ever played five-a-side football in a league format, but it's quite aggressive. There's a lot of kind of like macho nonsense, and we often experience, you know, microaggressions and racism that was quite, you know, hard to call out or not taken seriously. So instead, we just booked our own football pitch and said, listen, this is some basic kind of rules for this space, and everyone's welcome. There's no aggro. Everyone's welcome to just play football in a friendly, nice way, where the focus is on friendship and not counting score and winning. And that grew organically over time. You know, we were just a bunch of friends, and we still are just a bunch of friends. There's no KPIs or theories of change or anything like that. We're a horizontal structure. There's no funding, but importantly, there is routine, and that informality from the early days still very much remains the same. And yeah, we focus on being a bunch of friends and not an organisation or a charity. So the relations resemble connections that are more synonymous with a leisure space than a competitive sport environment. Your worth is not determined by how good you are at football or your ability. Everyone is welcome, everyone is valued, and everyone has the right to be in that space. And really, it's about solidarity and friendships, not charity. At the start of every Football for All session, we have a circle time, which must look quite funny to other people on other pitches at Power League. But yeah, we all sit down together, everyone says the name and usually their favourite football team or what language they speak. And then we have a conversation about why we exist, what we do, why we're different, and also say that, you know, if anyone has any issues, whether it's they're feeling stressed, depressed, anxious, or have issues with immigration or the police, then this is a space where people can talk about it openly. And if we can't help, then we'll try to find someone that can help. So yeah, it's a very different space to a typical football space. And importantly, to make it accessible for people seeking asylum, we recognise the social and economic barriers faced by people. So therefore, we have like a kit bag. We get boots for people that need boots. If someone needs a lift, we'll try to find them a lift or try to get them access to a bike. All these things, and pitch hire is the big one. So we ask players that can afford to play to pay, which subsidises other people as well. So asylum support is very rarely enough for essential living items such as food, clothing, toiletries, and phone top-up. Leisure is often treated as a luxury, and this is something that, like I said at the start, is really my passion project. I don't believe that leisure is a luxury. I think it's absolutely essential to existence and everyday life. Life is not just about surviving. It's not just about the bareness of having air in your lungs. It is about living beyond the bare as well. So really, Football for All is about advocating that leisure spaces are as important as all the other important things that organisations like Pathras do. So Football for All has kit bag for the boots. Like I said, regulars keep their boots. We don't ask people to kind of go into the boot bag every week because we think that's quite demeaning. It's not like lost property in PE, like everyone's got their own set of boots that they can play with throughout the week as well. And yeah, transport's provided and pitch hire is paid for. And this is what we look like. This is our group on a Sunday, just a big bunch of pals. We always do a photo at the end. And as you can see, the Yorkshire St. Parley flag is in there as well. At this point, I will make a point about gender. Despite us saying here that all genders are welcome, over the years, we've probably only had, you know, maybe 10 to 20 women footballers who have come down, and often they don't stick around long. And there's a huge range of reasons for that. But we worked with Republica, another football, a left-wing football team in Leeds, and through that we set up a women and non-binary session on Saturdays. So whilst women are still very welcome to come on a Sunday, there's a women and non-binary only session on a Saturday now as well. Which obviously I don't attend, because that's their space, but we work quite closely together. So why is it important? Why is football for all important? And this is where I bring in some of the conversations that I had during my time doing my PhD. And for me, it's those kind of small things that have deep significance. So regaining a sense of control over time. Navigating the UK asylum system often takes years. During this time, people seeking asylum are left in limbo as they are unable to work and unsure of the outcome of their application. Not only are they kept waiting for the unknown, people have no indication of how long they'll be waiting for. For many, it feels like the Home Office has complete control over how their time is experienced. So here's a couple of quotes from players at Football for All. Samir said, "Just I'm waiting. If the interview comes to me, I'm good. I'm just waiting and waiting. Sometimes I speak to my solicitor and say, what's the problem? And he just tells me to keep waiting and waiting. Home Office don't give me an answer. All the time I just stay here in my house, you know. In this country, everything is chance. You just wait and you have to be patient in this country." And Mazen, and this was familiar throughout all the people that I spoke to during my PhD, but also the conversations I have now with clients at Pathras. Mazen said, "Just I sleep as much as possible because I had nothing to do. The next day is always hard. It's hard going to sleep with that bad feeling, not knowing what you're going to do the next day, because you know the next day is going to be the same day again and again." And at that point, we were walking around Leeds, and he took me to his old asylum accommodation, and he looked up at his bedroom that he had there, and he said to me, I said, what feelings do you have about it? Is it good feelings or bad feelings? He was like, "Chris, I have no feelings about it. I have no feelings because I had to just sleep. I had to sleep to get through the days. Like, that was the only way that I could physically pass time. Time felt sticky, it felt dead, and the only way you could get through it was to sleep." So Football for All, within this context, is interesting because, like, through the conversations that we had, it really came apparent that it was about regaining control over time. The kind of macro politics of football and accessing leisure spaces was really important within experiencing time. So the routine element of Football for All every Sunday, and it used to be every Thursday as well, allows people to punctuate this open-ended time. Being able to temporally punctuate time allowed people to reclaim control over time, and control over time on their own terms through having something to look forward to. So Mazen said, if you have nothing to do, like absolute nothing, you are just waiting for Monday to go to pick up your money and buy your food. So if there's something going on Sunday, like something you like football, you can't wait for it. And Khalid here, like, really emotionally kind of outlines the importance of having something to look forward to, having something to pull you through the week. He said, but I would just think, fuck, today is Wednesday, tomorrow I get to play football. Fuck it, tomorrow I get to play football. Fuck it, fuck this place, fuck it all, but let me get through today and then it'll be okay. And it was, I remember being sat with Khalid when he was saying that, and he was talking about how he was really fed up and he was close to kind of giving up and just trying to leave the UK or worse. And he said that football really was the thing that he could kind of just hold on to and know that if he could get through this day, he could pull himself through to the next day and then get to football. So yeah, it really hit home the importance of having a sense of control over how time is felt in the UK while seeking asylum. Obviously, the significance of social connections was massive at Football for All as well. So the hostile environment and the wider asylum system often leaves people feeling loneliness and experience idleness as well. Because people are forcibly dispersed around the country, they often split up from friends that they might have made on the journey. Many of the relationships experienced by the participants were defined as friendship rather than service users. And I think this is, quite important, because within that space, it's not just accessed by, people seeking asylum or forced migrants. It's also people that have lived in the community quite a while, or other transient communities like students, and therefore you're not kind of defined as, a refugee or someone seeking asylum. In that space, everyone's just footballers, and it allows kind of friendship to take a stronger hold. And that emotional attachment to one another spilled out of the space of Football for All into everyday life. And it was really important when it came to supporting people through the precarious asylum system. And I didn't know this until I did the PhD study, but one of the guys talked about, like, when he got granted refugee status and his 28-day period of transition finished, and he was lost, he didn't know what to do. People from Football for All took it upon themselves to let him stay on the sofa, and he just moved around other people's houses until he got himself sorted. And what's really nice about that for me was that, I might kind of be the person who does a lot of the organising of Football for All, but I didn't know anything about it, so all people took it upon themselves. And that's the importance of those kind of friendships that are built at Football for All. And then there's pleasure. There's the importance of pleasure. So we often take for granted the social significance of pleasure and the pleasure experienced in leisure and sport spaces. As activists, we should recognise the political experience, the political significance of pleasure. And like I said before, living is mainly about experiencing pleasure. You think about the reasons we do the things that we do, and pleasure is central to a lot of that. And during my research, kind of outlined 4 different types of pleasure: euphoric pleasure, so the pleasure of scoring a goal, that a lot of the guys talked about; the pleasure of friendship, which was fostered massively across the space, and different kinds of friendship as well. The cathartic pleasure, the pleasure of forgetting temporarily. So I remember one of the guys, he at Football for All, he'd talk about how it was like coming up for air, how it was space where his mind was absolutely clear and he could just play football and enjoy being present within that moment. And then there's cognitive pleasure as well. So a lot of the guys talked about how going through the asylum system kind of made their brains feel numb, that kind of didn't allow them to engage with the cognitive ability. And they described how playing football and accessing the leisure spaces around football really engaged that part of the brain, whether it was, problem solving in actually playing football, or whether engaging with the logistics of running Football for All itself. And I just love this quote from Adrienne Marie Brown. Pleasure is not one of the spoils of capitalism. It's what our bodies, our human systems are structured for. It's the aliveness and awakening, the gratitude and humility, the joy and celebration of being miraculous. And yeah, really, I think that our activism should never overlook never overlook the importance of pleasure. Yes, a lot of us in this chat are involved with, you know, fighting and advocating for the basic rights of people seeking asylum and migrants. But can we go further than that as well? Can we advocate for the right to people to stay, but can we advocate for the right to people to live beyond just being here? So does that actually change anything? Does football for all change anything? Are we dismantling the hostile environment? Oh, and these are all big questions that, like, at the end of the day, like, it's up to us to ask ourselves that. I don't think it's a clear question of saying yes or no. But what I would say is this. So when I was doing the research, I chatted to my friend, one of my friends, and I said, what I find interesting is that, you know, a lot of the guys here, like, are migrants, are going through the asylum system, but no one ever talks about it. It's never talked about here. And I find that weird. Like, why is no one chatting about this stuff? And he said to me, because Chris, we're not refugees when we're here. We're like, that's not our identity. We're footballers. We're playing football, and that's our identity here. And I think beyond thinking about, you know, systems and structures, the political significance of someone saying we're footballers, deciding their own identity, expressing their own identity beyond the ones that are prescribed to them by the Home Office or by us as charities, is really important. You know, he's saying we're not footballers. We're footballers. We're not refugees. So it's this idea of claiming identity from the bottom up rather than the top down. And I think that's a really important, powerful thing that we should celebrate. And beyond just football, we need to think about how we can implicate that into other settings as well. So that leads me to, what can you do? And first and foremost, become a leisure activist. Bring activists into your leisure time. Bring activism into your leisure time. You know, politics doesn't sit over there. These fights don't sit, you know, in the formalized nature of you know, work or parliament. The whole point of the hostile environment is to bring borders into everyday life, is to bring it into our everyday interactions, is to kind of, you know, build this papers first please environment where we question each other, where we're driven by being the border guard. So how do we fight that? And the best way that we take the fight to the hostile environment is by meeting it in the everyday, is by pushing it back in the everyday. So become a leisure activist. Think about how you can change your leisure spaces, or think about your leisure spaces, and how do you make them as accessible for people seeking asylum and beyond. And I'm not here, I don't have the answers for you, like the specific answers for you, but it shouldn't be that difficult. Like, just think critically about the things that you can do, whether it's a coffee club, whether it's a walking club, whatever it is that you're doing. How do you engage people beyond, you know, people with similar social and economic capital to yourselves? So one of the nice things that we've done at Pathras recently is that we've started a coffee club that runs on a Thursday evening, and it is really a space away from the Pathras building, away from our weekly drop-in, in a mainstream cafe called Archive in Leeds, where we just sit, drink coffee, play lots of Uno, get very competitive about playing Uno, and just enjoy each other's company. And we don't really talk about anything kind of Pathras or kind of people's case related. It's just a space to hang out. And one of the things that drove us to choose Archive as a place was, like I said, it's a mainstream space. You know, a lot of the people that we work with are fed up of, you know, any opportunity, any kind of leisure opportunity that's being offered to them on the basis of their immigration status, but not just on the basis of their immigration status, but reinforcing it as well. People want to feel connected to the everyday, to the rhythms and of everyday life, to kind of get over this idea that the hostile environment somehow secludes them and draws borders around them. People want to be involved in everyday life in Leeds and beyond. So we really wanted to make a space that, yeah, you know, makes people visible within so-called mainstream spaces, rather than just making another, you know, mini Pathras away from Pathras. And this is my advice to, if you were interested in starting anything, is refrain from making refugee exclusive spaces where possible. Allow people to build their own identities rather than you deciding what their identity is. And yeah, like, the world's a lot richer for interacting with people beyond the ones that you're kind of naturally sharing spaces with, whether at work or beyond. So yeah, that's my biggest advice. At Football for All, we never wanted it to be refugees or asylum seekers only. It's for everyone, and the people who attend it much prefer it that way. So yeah, that's one of the reasons why it's successful as successful as it is. And finally, just because something is informal doesn't mean it's meaningless. Like I said before, often the most beautiful and significant things are the informal interactions, are the informal conversations, the informal walking clubs, the informal chats with people. Just because there's no KPIs, just because there's no funding body, just because you're not doing an impact report, doesn't mean that it's not important. Arguably, it's more important. So I'll finish there. There's a photo of our Football for All group to finish. I'll answer some questions in the chat if anyone wants to stick any in the chat. Also, there's my email address. Like I said, it's a passion project for me. I'm happy to answer any questions. I'm happy to have phone conversations with people, whatever it is. Like, it is my thing. So I'm happy to have those conversations with people. So I'm just having a quick look in the chat. Brilliant. We've just set up a footy team called Hope United at St Helens College for Refugees and Asylum Seekers. They love it. Yeah. And again, like, that's really cool. Like, college is, you know, it's like knowing that people are on your side, even in like college space as well. A lot of the guys that we talked about, and this is going back a few years now, described how, you know, they'd been kicked out of their college teams and stuff like that. So because they'd lost their place at college, and then they'd suddenly lost their, you know, ability to access any leisure space. So yeah, it's good to have stuff within colleges, but also beyond as well. Will we get these slides after? Yes, Ali said, do you do? Yeah. Okay. There's no more questions. Then thanks so much for coming, and yeah, please get in contact if you want to stay in contact.